Hey writers, you're listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life Podcast, where we highlight an episode from our backlist that will bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, Director of Kobo Writing Life. This week, I picked an episode from 2021 with best-selling author Alexis Hall. Alexis joined us to discuss his Kobo original, Murder Most Actual, and what it was like writing his very first cozy mystery. He talked to us about his career as a hybrid author, the inspirations behind Murder Most Actual, and how he tries to normalize queer relationships in his writing. Hope you enjoy this episode, and most importantly, happy Pride!
On today's episode, we sat down and chatted with Alexis Hall, a genrequeer writer of kissing books.
Yeah, we talked to him about his latest book, which is a Kobo original that you can get exclusively on Kobo. And it is a cozy mystery called Murder Most Actual. It has all of your cozy mystery tropes that you would want, but includes just like the fun and witticism that you'd imagine coming from Alexis Hall.
And we chatted to Alexis about plotting his book, how he approached creating the puzzle, kind of solve along aspect of a cozy mystery. And we also talked about the representation in his books. He exclusively writes LGBTQ characters. And we talked about the lead characters in Murder Most Actual, who are a lesbian couple whose marriage is a little bit rocky. So we talked about that and what that means for representation. And we had a great chat with him.
Yeah. And he even tells us who he would play in Clue or Cluedo.
Clue is correct.
Really delighted to have Alexis Hall with us today to chat on the Kobo Writing Life podcast. Alexis, thank you so much for joining.
No problem at all. Lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we're here sort of to talk about Murder Most Actual, but also to just chat to you in general about like your writing journey and things like that. If any of the readers aren't familiar or listeners, Murder Most Actual is a Kobo original that is just the coziest mystery. But I described it, it feels as satisfying as an Agatha Christie mystery, but as witty and engaging as Knives Out. And also just visually fulfilling as like watching a movie is how it felt while I was reading it. And Alexis, you're really well known for writing queer romances. And was this your first cozy? I know there's a couple of other like Sherlock-inspired stories that you've had.
Yeah, it's my first cozy. It's arguably like my thing with a sort of mystery-ish vibe. It depends on how you cut it. So I do queer genre fiction, I think is what I tend to say. So I've also got, to plug my other works, I've got Kane series, which is sort of on the paranormal romancy / kind of mystical detective end. So those, they usually have a mystery angle, but also a mystical angle. So it's one of those mysteries where the solution is it was a wizard. Then there's The Affair of the Mysterious Letter, which is the very specifically Sherlockian one, which is basically a scandal in Bohemia, but set in a very high weirdness magic world. And again, like a mystery, but the client is from Carcosa. And again, the solution is it was a wizard, but it's not actually it was a wizard, but it's a mystery where there is you need to understand the metaphysics of the fantasy world for it to work. So I think, unless I'm forgotten something, Murder Most Actual is my first cozy mystery, and I think my first mystery where part of the solution doesn't involve magic.
Nice. That's interesting. I like the idea of you not remembering because of the sheer volume of work that you have also.
Well, I've been doing this for about 10 years. Like it's been a while now.
Yeah. Did writing a cozy mystery, was it easier because there are so many sort of tropes that you have to play with, there's sort of points that you hit, or does that make it more difficult to write in this genre because there is that reader expectation of like, I pick up a cozy and I know exactly what this is?
I think it's a little from column A, little from column B. I think so. Partly with like tropes are always difficult because you have what my perception is that people often disagree about what tropes are. Like the cozy mystery itself is quite a complex genre. Like is the cozy mystery Agatha Christie? Is the cozy mystery Dorothy L. Sayers? Is the cozy mystery kind of modern police procedurals? Is the cozy mystery Castle? Because actually, like there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff with murders in that's not from the 20s where blatantly there's no stakes and blatantly you're going to catch the bad guy, which is part of it. So I think there was a line to walk with it, I think, between because it's got comedy elements as well. It's kind of a romantic-y mystery comedy thing. The only thing it's not quite is the magic weirdly comedy thing. And I think the line I was really cautious to walk was the line between nodding gently at tropes and just played out parody. So there are some very obvious just straight parodies in there. Like there's a character in there who is very clearly Poirot. There's a character in there who is slightly less clearly Peter Wimsey. There's multiple characters, all of whom are clearly the protagonists from Cluedo. Like it's so yeah, there were a lot of beats to hit. On the other hand, because the mystery genres in general, in some ways, cozy mystery even more so. Although it's very trope driven, it's also very puzzle driven. And that actually makes doing the puzzle bit actually a lot harder than I think in the other styles of mystery I've looked at. Because the other types of mystery writing I've done have been, first of all, they've had paranormal elements. I'm so sorry, I can speak normally, I promise. And that covers a multitude of sins. But also, so the Kate Kane series is very specifically has a slightly noir edge. And the thing about noir detectives is often you're not supposed to be able to play along at home. Like you're watching a competent person doing their job, but you're not really supposed to be able to figure it out before, Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe do. And also often the point is that crime is opaque. Like very famously, like The Thin Man ends with the detective in that just kind of going like, this is what I think. I was wrong about this. I was right about this. I don't know, just murder's weird. Similarly, The Affair of the Mysterious Letter, I need to give my books shorter, less complicated titles, is very strongly inspired by Holmes. And again, Holmes is an odd one because you can argue that all detective stuff comes from, okay, if you're being a complete dickhead about it, it comes from Hamlet. That's nonsense. People sometimes claim that. Or it comes from Moses in the Rue Morgue, where, spoilers for a 200-year-old book, 200 years old-ish, it turns out it's a monkey, or it comes from Holmes. And so you have this odd thing where all the genres have Holmesian roots, and Holmes has that very kind of complex clues thing that the cozy has, and the sometimes slightly spurious thing that the cozy has, although sometimes the spuriousness in Holmes is more because it's written in the 19th century. But one of the things about Holmes is that, like, a lot of the time it doesn't have the play along at home factor, even though, like, there's a lot of didacticness about kind of Holmes's method of doing something anybody can learn as long as you're a proper Victorian patriarch. Actually, what happens in Holmes is there is a baffling mystery, and then Holmes walks in and says, aha, he's this because of these 6 things I noticed but didn't mention, that apparently lead us to this conclusion, even though they don't at all lead to that conclusion. And then Watson says, my God, Holmes, you're right. How do you do it? And then Holmes says, authorial bias. And so there needed to be less. And I think you can play along at home to an extent with all of my other mystery type things, because today playing along at home is part of the fun. But because they're in genres where it's less expected, I've not had to pay as much attention to it. Like, The Affair of the Mysterious Letter, you have to have played along at home to the point of having worked out some quite specific things about the metaphysics of the setting. Whereas I think the most actual genuinely plays fair by cozy mystery rules. I hope. Sorry, that was really long. I hope that answers the question.
No, I think it does for sure play by the quote unquote rules, And
I just kind of want to ask, building on the play at home aspect and the puzzle nature of a cozy mystery, I imagine writing this was not an easy task, especially when it comes to plotting out your red herrings, your false leads, etc. What was the writing and plotting process like for this book?
Basically twice. When I started, I wasn't certain whether this was going to be a marriage in peril romance with mystery elements or a mystery with marriage in peril romance elements. So I kind of hedged my bets and then sent it off to my lovely editor, Rebecca. And we had a conversation and decided it was best taken in the mystery direction. So she's a big mystery fan, had some very strong ideas about, like, kind of maybe you should include some elements like this. Maybe you should focus more on this bit. Maybe you should do more of that. So the first draft was a lot less play along at homeable. And then I went and did quite a long second draft where I added about 30,000 extra words. And that's the point where I sat down and put in all of I took some words out as well, which is why it's not being words long. And that's where I sat down and put in all of very specific red herrings, very specific kind of, and this hints that there may be a thing here, but it's really not a thing. It's really a thing.
I enjoyed the Cluedo aspects. I know you've already mentioned Cluedo or Clue to Canadians. But the chapter titles, I just loved that nod to everything. For example, there's Liza in the boathouse with a camera, and that each chapter has a start of that because it just brought the humor to the start of each new chapter. I just wanted to ask if you were worried about spoiling the story by doing that.
I wasn't worried about spoiling the story. What I'm always worried about when I do a gimmick like that, and again, in the KK series, something similar. Every book is called something and something. Every chapter is called something and something. And what I did worry about was making a rod for my own back, which was every chapter has to start with person in the place with the thing, and it did get a bit difficult, and some of them are a bit tenuous. But I think I didn't worry too much about spoilers, firstly because I'm not the kind of person who cares about spoilers, even to an extent. In like, obviously mysteries are different because there is the puzzle aspect, there is the play along at home aspect, but even in a mystery, I'm not too bothered about spoilers that aren't the whodunit spoiler thing. And actually you can use it for misdirection. Like there's a chapter title which is X in the Y with Z, where the X is dead at that point. So I think most of the time I avoid spoilers.
I was going to ask about that chapter title because that was an excellent misdirection for somebody who was like kept going back to the table of contents because the chapter titles were so good. And I was like, wait a minute, I think I solved it. I did not. At what point in the writing process did you know what your ending was going to be and how the murder was going to play out?
Oh, sorry, again, it's a difficult one to talk about without having too much in the way of spoilers, but that was almost the beginning of it. What I wanted to do with the book was to kind of, it's a lot of my books are love letters of various kinds, partly because I'm a romance writer. And I always wanted this to be kind of a love letter to the crime genre as a whole. And the big thing in the crime genre right now is kind of true crime, and hence the whole true crime podcaster has to solve real murder thing. And what I really wanted was for it to end with the kind of the tropes and the constructs of the cozy mystery format kind of falling down and it going to more of a true crime place. Like I think one of the things I even say in the book is that every long form true crime podcast ends with a lot of them end with the narrator in the true crime podcast of voice saying, when I first started this journey 8 months ago, I thought I'd have answers, but now I only have more questions. And that's kind of what I wanted to. So I wanted to have elements of that and elements of the bit like in The Thin Man where the detective does the rundown and actually the detective's wrong about some stuff. So I wanted it to be very much that the solution is actually crime doesn't work this way. Because there is a secret criminal mastermind, a bit spoiler, but there aren't these elaborate, we're all being picked off one at a time, kind of, 10 green bottles situations, as they call it in the thing. Because one of the things I got confused about was to what extent I should acknowledge the existence in the setting of the works that the book clearly references, and which, if those things existed in the setting, the characters in the book should clearly acknowledge that those things exist, if you see what I mean. Which is why it's not referred to as an and then never none situation, even though, because then you're like, but then they know that and then never none exists.
I really liked the true crime podcast aspect because I listen to those podcasts. And I wanted to ask, are you a murderino, somebody that does listen to true crime podcasts as well? Or was it just the popularity of the genre that inspired you?
Love and column. So I, like everyone, it goes back a long way. I'm sorry, we use the phrase poop socked, which is a phrase that I borrowed from a gaming podcast, meaning to consume continuously without breaks. So I kind of poop socked the first series of Serial when that dropped. And then, like a lot of people that are into true crime, I kind of had that, are there ethical questions to be asked about taking real murders that happened comparatively recently, presenting a really one-sided version of them and turning that into entertainment? So then I kind of stepped back from that for a while. I'd watch the occasional kind of documentary on Netflix in the background. And then obviously I got back into it when I was doing the actual work on Murder Most Actual, because I had to actual work on Murder Most Actual, where I sort of needed to catch up with where the genre was now. Like one of the things that I'm most impressed with about, is it Sarah Koenig or Sarah Koenig? Or Koenig, I don't know how to pronounce it.
Koenig, I think.
One of the things I'm most impressed about Sarah Koenig actually is that she did kind of, after the first two series of Serial, and after people kept coming up to her and saying, so what does this tell us about the criminal justice system? Kind of say, well, not a lot, because it's a really unusual case, and then do a series that was just literally about an ordinary courthouse and about quite boring cases coming up in front of quite dysfunctional legal systems, which is actually it's a really interesting series, but it doesn't have the compelling quality of this like one long, oh my God, there's a twist every episode thing.
I liked the fact that, so it's like Liza is the character who's the podcaster and her wife is not a fan of the genre. Well, kind of is a fan of the genre because of her, but not necessarily somebody that would probably willingly listen to true crime. But I did like how it mixed together by Like it made the cozy mysteries it made you pause at one point because you're just like, oh yes, people are dying. But at the same time, always questioning, just sort of like, should you be recording this or like trying to capture this throughout? I thought it was balanced really well.
I'm glad. Because a lot of what I want to, because a lot of what I write is a response to my overall passion for genre shit. I often do find myself having to walk that line between acknowledging the more difficult aspects of stuff like, true crime has ethical concerns that a lot of people have, and making it clear that it comes from a place of protection and that I'm not just trying to crap all over it, which I'm hoping came across. Yeah, like part of the reason she's a short form podcaster is I think it's a lot easier to. There's far fewer questions when you do short form podcasting, where it's just this week we're going to talk about Elizabeth Bathory. And you're like, okay, she's been dead for 500 years. There's not a lot that can go wrong with that. Rather than because there are some. I don't want to be too gendered about it, but I find particularly with male true crime podcasters and male true crime writers, there's a lot more of I'm going to go and dig into this existing murder case and decide I've solved it, which does give me slightly more pause.
I wanted to touch a bit on your main characters in the book, the main couple, especially Hannah and Liza, who are a lesbian couple going through a bit of a rocky patch. And it kind of gives us a couple of things you don't see a lot in fiction, which is a story about a queer couple that isn't about their queerness, and also a not perfect queer relationship. And I was just wondering why this was important to you and what your thought process was about including the lesbian couple as the lead without it being about them.
Part of it is the joy of basically only writing LGBTQIA plus fiction, is that there comes a point where it can't just all be about the queerness of the couple being the central conflict, because then I'd have written the same book, I think, about 20 times by now. So particularly when I write genre fiction with queer protagonists, which is literally what I do, it's almost always first and foremost genre fiction, secondarily with queer protagonists. And it's important to me that it is reflective of experiences with which at least some queer people will identify. That's as far as I go in claiming representation or authenticity. I think it's reflective experiences with which some people may identify, but that also it's not just about being an ex. So I write romances like queer couples, I write cozy mysteries about queer people, and it's not about that. It's about a marriage in peril, sort of, less so in the final draft, but mostly it's about, I don't think really being a lesbian changes your experience of being trapped in a hotel where people are being murdered one by one that much. I think is a big part of it. So and the other thing you asked about was the not relationship. I think that's actually genuinely quite a complex one, because I do often have to sit back, and because I write entirely queer fiction, I do sometimes have to take a step back and say to myself, okay, are we in a place as a culture where you can do this with a queer couple and it doesn't have problematic implications? But first of all, I write a lot of LGBTQ plus fiction. If I never wrote flawed relationships, again, all my books would be dull. What's the second link? Oh, and the second thing again is I think there's a big advantage to it being a cozy mystery in this regard. And I think there's a big advantage to marriage in peril being a romance trope in that regard. In that, I think even if you were worried about having what might feel like a quote unquote negative depiction of a lesbian relationship, I think to romance readers, it's a marriage and they're having problems and they work through it, is very normalized. And one of the reasons you asked why this way of writing is important to me, and basically I feel it's normalizing. I think normalization is important. And if you're not a romance reader, then I think because the central thing is the mystery, I think the fact that it happens to be about a lesbian couple who also happen to have relationship difficulties at the start and work through them, I think it's very hard to extrapolate from that into generalizations about what lesbians are like.
I agree. And I think that not every relationship is perfect across the sexuality spectrum. So having a lesbian relationship in trouble is completely normal. Just ask 90% of my friends. But I also think the fact that Hannah and Liza are lesbians, but it's not a huge part of their story, but it is acknowledged. You do have other characters in the book kind of giving them a side eye or making a comment. So I think it both encapsulates what it's like to exist as a queer person in the world, but isn't a story about that, if that makes sense.
No, that's the line I try to walk. And again, it's because you don't want to completely erase kind of the realities of living as an LGBTQ person, but you also don't. But you also, particularly because it's cozy mystery, there's an extent to which you kind of want it to exist as much as possible in the fantasy space. Like no one has a go at Poirot for being a short Belgian man because he's freaking Poirot. But yeah, so that's about the way I wanted to walk. I think there's a couple of little acknowledgements of the fact that these are all. That all the other guests are kind of staid upper class British people are therefore a bit bothered, but mostly it's just you're in a hotel, people are getting murdered. Brackets also you happen to be gay. Those brackets.
I liked the other characters like learning throughout the book, but then also like pointing out that they were learning to Hannah and Liza, and you're just like, oh yeah, no, like we don't need to applaud you. You know, yeah. I thought that was very, very kind of accurate or true to how things are.
Yeah, there's a trope I fall back on occasionally, but I'm glad people like it.
So I listened to this as an audiobook, and I really liked how the narrator interpreted the different characters' accents, whether they were real or fake. And I was just sort of curious, is this something did you add extra notes into how this would be kind of picked up for the narrator, or was that purely from the description? So like, like Ruby's the femme fatale, but she has this like American Southern accent at some point, and then Belloc, who is the fake French accent. Just wondering what notes you give, or is it purely from the story?
So as a general thing, you do always get, nearly always, barring one slightly ropey experience I once had, but you do nearly always get asked for audio notes when there's an audio production together. Whoever was handling the audio at this end, I don't know how things are done with Kobo, was very efficient. I got some little spreadsheet with each character, and then it was actually really nice. They asked for like what their background is, where they're from, any other notes. So that is from notes, and yes, because a lot of the characters are actually doing fake accents. It does.
I loved it.
Yeah, it does occasionally, but the notes occasionally have things like kind of, this man is probably English but pretending to be French. This woman is deliberately concealing her background and trying to sound like she's not from anywhere in particular, and so on.
Loved it. I thought it was a really, it just really added to the audiobook experience. I don't know if you listened to the audiobook, Rachel, either, but you should if you didn't. Yeah.
I'll add the audiobook to my library as soon as we're off. I want to listen to it.
Yeah, she did a great job. But so to step away from Murder Most Actual, could you talk to us about how you kind of started in writing, and did you always write throughout your life? I know you've kind of mentioned before that it was maybe only in the past 10 years that you've been writing romance. Like, how did this become a thing that you're doing?
It's so basically about a decade ago, self-publishing started getting really big. And one of the things I've always had difficulty with writing in general is that I often feel like it's quite mystified. Like there's quite a lot of there's a lot of prestige attached to being a writer that I have real issues with. But around the time self-publishing started getting big, I think that helped me to think of this as just like something I could probably just have a go at. And around the time, there were quite a lot of boutique presses cropping up, and there were quite a lot of open calls. In particular, there was a small press did an open call for lesbian stories and steampunk stories. So I submitted 2 things to them. One of which was the thing that wound up becoming Prosperity, which is a steampunk western set in a flying city above the northeast of England, with sky krakens and flying pirates, and then a series of follow-up stories about all kinds of other weird things. It was originally almost entirely written in 17th century thieves' cant, which was completely impenetrable. So then the current version is still quite a lot written in 17th century thieves' cant and is slightly more penetrable. And the other open call was for the story I submitted. That became what's now Kate Kane series, which I will get back to the 5th block of the moment that my docket clears up a bit. And then after publisher picked those up, I also started work on a contemporary story, which wound up being Glitterland, and that I think wound up being published first because the market realities at the time were that a contemporary story about 2 cis guys was more marketable than a paranormal thing about a disaster lesbian or a weird thing set in the sky with a non-binary romantic interest. And then it kind of worked from there. I hooked up with my agent fairly early on. We've had a very productive relationship ever since. And then I just kind of bounced around doing kind of whatever for whoever, doing some sort of indie press work, some traditional press work. The Affair of the Bashir Letter was my first full-on trade paperback thing. And then shortly after that came boyfriend material through Sourcebooks, which is, I think, by far the most popular thing I've written to date. And then that got me on people's radar, and I got a whole lot of offers, none of which I felt I could say no to, which is why I've written about 4 books this year, which was a bit stressful. And one of which was Murder Most Actual, which is how I got here.
Nice. So have you ever full on independently published yourself, or has it always been through like a smaller press or something like that?
Yes and no is the answer. So quite a large chunk of my back catalogue, the boutique press I originally published them through for slightly complex historical reasons when I went getting my rights back from them. And so those were self-published, but obviously they'd already been edited, but I had to do all the layout and formatting and blah stuff myself, which I hated doing, which is why I don't self-publish very much. The only thing I've ever self-published myself from completely from scratch was the 4th book in the Kate Kane series, and that's because the first 2 books came out with my original publisher, but again, because of market realities, a slightly weird paranormal series about disaster lesbians solving mysteries involving vampires wasn't really where they wanted to put their time and energy. So when I got that back, I then sold the 2 books in the backlist and the 3rd book to a different digital publisher, but then they wouldn't pick up for the next series. The book ended on a massive downer cliffhanger because, like, you know, a well-liked recurring character got quasi-permanently turned into a statue, and virtually everyone the heroine cared about was dead. So I, from scratch, self-published book 4 in the series, which is now available. You can buy it on, you know, the usual places you buy books, and I will at some point from scratch self-publish book 5 in the series. But because I got a bunch of offers this year, the stuff that this is dull commercial reality, but the stuff that my publishers are actually paying me money to do in advance is taking priority over something that I would have to both write and edit and format and do all the rigmarole of making available for no money until people started buying the book. So that's my history of self-publishing. It's I can do it, but I'm not a fan.
What would you say the biggest differences have been working with a small indie press versus a more traditional, larger publisher?
Oh, God, it varies hugely. And it's not just about small versus large. Like, different publishing houses are different. And I also work across genres. So the press I first worked with very specifically focused on queer fiction, which was nice in theory, but in practice it meant that there was quite a strong, partly because of market reality at the time, but partly because it's kind of their interest, a strong push towards stories about gay cis men, normally contempt stories about gay cis men. And to that, I've written some books about gay cis men that I am very proud of and that I am glad exist, but they didn't have the same resources as a large publisher. And in a smaller environment, it's not quite like small town versus big city, but there's an element of small town versus big city. Like, in a smaller environment, there's more room for sort of disagreements to create tension that they wouldn't necessarily have created. Working with bigger publishers, it could be you're a much smaller fish in a much bigger pond. That means they've got more resources, but you don't necessarily get as much of them. You can be quite overlooked. Again, depends on who you're working with. I've got something coming out in January through Montlake, which is obviously an Amazon original, and working with Amazon is exactly what you expect working with Amazon to be like. That's a corporation that doesn't let its employees take bathroom breaks. So they're very, very, very efficient, which I appreciate, really appreciate it. But there is that kind of, wow, this is a corporate machine thing. Not there's anything with corporate machines. And then working with Kobo again, I think it's the first time I've actually had I've actually worked with so it's not the first thing I've done with a digital publisher, obviously, because I've worked with Amazon as well. But it's the first thing I've done where they've brought in a freelance editor of my choice, which is nice. I mean, I've worked with Rebecca again, who I work with on Freedom of Letter. So that was a positive but slightly odd experience, because obviously, I was talking to Kobo on the one hand and talking to Rebecca on the other hand, and there was kind of a lot of bouncing back and forward and things. I think it worked really nicely. It was just a very different way of doing business. I think it's all about with everything in everything, they're saying there are advantages and disadvantages is really trite and information absent. It's basically, the advantages and disadvantages are about where you think they would be. Go with a small press, it's kind of like working with your family. They've got a lot of time for you, but what can your family get on your wick? You go for a big corporation, then you've got a lot of cultural inertia, but they've got a lot of resources. If you go with a smaller digital company like with Kobo, they're very on top of the digital publishing end. Obviously, that's what they do, but you wind up with an external editor, but they happen to be nice for me. You go with Amazon, you get a slightly scary insight into what Amazon... It was a really positive experience, I should say, working with them, but it was very Amazon.
It sounds like you're balancing a lot of different projects all the time, but you're still writing what you want to write. Like, how much of a say are you getting in when you are writing these things for different presses and stuff? Is it still you leading the story that you want to write?
Mostly. I mean, as always, it's like I am nowhere near big enough that I can just turn around and say, I want to do this, and you are not allowed to ask me questions. It's difficult because my place in the marketplace has changed. The marketplace has also changed. I think one thing that's really interesting that's happened over the last 10 years is that people who were like teenagers in 2010 reading YA, which has always been a bit more diverse, have grown up and are wondering where all the books they like have gone, which means there's now a lot more room in the market to, for example, write a cozy mystery about two lesbians that isn't just about being a lesbian and in which they're allowed to have a slightly flawed relationship. So it's partly the market has shifted to the point where the kinds of books I'm interested in writing are more marketable. It's partly that I'm very eclectic anyway, so it's very rare that there are conditions in which there is nothing that someone wants me to write that I don't want to write. I think it's a bit. Actually, a good example of it might be, so we're working with Kobo. I have a very nice conversation with people saying, we've seen this, we'd like to work with you. And then I sent about 4 or 5 pictures, and Murder Most Actual wound up being the one going forward. But they were all things that I've been genuinely happy to work on, and they were all things I genuinely wanted to do that were a bit like, there were some really bonkers ones. There was espionage fantasy with a weapon that erases things from history. There was Christmas ghost story romance set in a village under a curse where it's literally always Christmas. There was true crime podcast.
Rachel's dream village forever Christmas.
It was going to be spooky. And then there was true crime podcaster and her wife get trapped in murder hotel. I think there was one more, and I've forgotten what it was. I think it was a Shakespeare retelling round. I think it might have been a queer Shakespeare retelling with a corporate theme, but I can't remember anything else about it. But that's how I tend to work. So I throw things at walls and see what sticks, which means I have quite sticky walls. But it works for me.
Do you have any advice for authors who are trying to pitch a book just to summarize their idea into something that might stick to a wall? Get
an agent. Advice is really difficult, particularly because when how they say the easiest way to make a small fortune is to start with a large fortune. One of the things that's difficult is that any advice, I can give you great advice for getting into the exact kind of writing I got into at the exact time I started. So my first piece of advice would be build a time machine, go back to 2010 and start in the circumstances I started in. If you're really starting out, and again, this has changed a bit. If you're really starting out, if you're just trying to get things in front of people and you're trying to get the kind of story you want told in front of people, expecting it to be commercial, I sometimes apply what I tend to refer to as the one but rule, which is, again, this was particularly, I think this mattered more back in the day, which is but particularly because I was writing LGBTQ plus fiction. I hate between saying LGBTQ plus and LGBTQIA plus because I want to be inclusive, but I also don't want to pretend I'm representing people I've never written about, I think I've never written a book with an intersex protagonist. Back when I started writing LGBTQ plus fiction, you could basically picture it's like this, but gay. And what you couldn't really do is it's like this, but gay and also set on Mars. And that is slowly changing, basically I don't think... Publishing is a business. And businesses are about money, and money is about capitalism, and capitalism is amoral. I do not think capitalism has become less amoral in the last 20 years, but I think the market has started putting its butts in different places, which I am aware sounds hilarious to Americans. So 10 years ago, it's Anita Blake, but she's a lesbian. Or if you prefer, it's the Dresden Files, but she's a gay woman. It's slightly better with the Anita Blake comparison precisely because you can't do it's the Dresden Files, but she's a woman and she's a gay. That's two buts. You're not allowed two buts. Obviously, as there's more and more things out there, that becomes a lot easier because you can. So, for example, if I wanted to do a gay royal romance 10 years ago, I'd have to say it's a royals romance, but they're gay. Whereas now, if I wanted to do a gay royals romance, I could say it's red, white, and royal blue, but also it's set on Mars. Probably not it's set on Mars. That would be too far. But yeah, it's red, white, and royal blue, but also one of them's on the ace spectrum, but also, one of them's got clinical anxiety. If you are concerned about commercial viability, which if you are trying to get into commercial publishing, like maybe that's the rule for successful pictures, is try and have one but. The other piece of advice I'd have more generally is decide what you want. So the question you asked was very specifically, how do you summarize, how do you pitch? But part of there's kind of a zeroth step there, which is obviously zeroth as in before the first, like the zeroth law of thermodynamics. There's a zeroth step there, which is decide what you want to get out of the pitch. Like decide, do you want to write the story you want to write and fuck everybody else? And if they don't buy it, that's their problem. Then yeah, whatever you're on to write, pitch it how you want to pitch it. And if it doesn't work out, self-publish. And loads of people have done well doing that. On the other hand, be aware that self-publishing means doing all the payout stuff yourself. If you want to write a New York Times bestseller, then maybe look at what's currently being a New York Times bestseller and you write the literary equivalent of Oscar bait, which I don't really know what that is because that's not something I chase. Like weirdly, I can identify it on TV a lot better. Like you can tell when a TV show is going for an Emmy. You're like, they've done this episode where none of the characters speak. That's because they want an Emmy. And do that. If you want to get into the vaguely traddy end I'm in, that's where the one but rule comes in. Really getting an agent helps. Like if you want to work in commercial, obviously it doesn't help you want to self-publish for obvious reasons, but if you want to go commercial, getting an agent helps. But there's this horrible chicken egg thing, or this horrible small fortune, large fortune thing, where getting an agent's really helpful for getting published. Getting published is really helpful for getting an agent. The way around I did it was small press agent, more traditional publishing. That is not the only way to do it. That's not necessarily the right way to do it. That's the way that it just kind of happened for me. It just kind of, sorry, I don't mean that in like kind of, I'm so blessed by fate, #blessed. I just mean like, I didn't go into this with a great deal of planning. There was a certain amount of, apparently this is where I am now. So that was the route I took. Small press agent, try publishing. If you want to get the agent first, try get the agent first. If you want to ignore publishing entirely, like there are loads of routes and loads of options. It depends on what you want. Oh, the other thing, of course, I would say is that if you are an aspiring writer, do bear in mind that you need to get really comfortable with not knowing if you have an income next year. Like, yeah, don't go into writing for financial security or stability or to become rich. Like, that's not sensible. If you want to do that, just become a professional gambler. It's more reliable.
So what is next? You've mentioned a bunch of projects there, but I'm mostly curious about, is this the last of Hannah and Liza? I know it's like a standalone and like maybe you won't revisit, but I'm hoping you'll say no.
I think I've got I don't have any concrete plans going forward. It's a bit difficult because of I don't know what I'd do because the whole premise is that it's someone who doesn't normally solve murders put in a situation where she's having to solve murders. I never say no to things. One of the things I do always say when people ask me, "Are you doing a sequel?" question is, it's not really in my control. Like if Kobo rang me up tomorrow and said, "We'll give you some money to do a sequel," I'd do a sequel because I like money. Although it wouldn't be out in 2022 or 2023 because I have a lot of stuff coming up. So, all
right. So basically, if I want that, I have to throw money at it. I got it.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
No worries. And also, can you see your books on the screen? Not necessarily the big screen.
It's never say never thing. My agent has a person who does film rights. I have had things that people have expressed interest in. I've had things that people have kind of made fairly small kind of, we'll take this away, do something with it kind of offers on. It's one of those things where, again, the part of me that is deeply mercenary and is aware this is a business is very aware that, being in film is great because the reach of broadcast media and film and filmic media is so staggeringly vast relative to the reach of print media. That's just the reality of it, that it's worth it for the publicity alone. I say with publicity alone, obviously. It's not with publicity alone. If you want my books, you're going to have to pay money for them. But it's just you're suddenly in a whole different ballpark. The flip side of that is these things constantly happen and people constantly get interested and nothing ever gets made because there are millions of books and slightly less millions of TV shows. But yeah, something I'm completely open to.
One question I want to ask, which is a little bit of a left turn, is in your Twitter bio, you describe yourself as a genrequeer writer of kissing books. And I just really want to know what genrequeer means to you.
So it's partly just a play on genderqueer, but it's just that I write queer literature across the fictional genres. I hate saying that I write things that are hard to categorize because I think it makes me sound like a wanker. Some of my things are a little bit genre mashup-y. So for example, Murder Most Actual is a comedy, cozy mystery, marriage and peril romance. Affair of the Mysterious Letter is a comedy Sherlock Holmes weird fantasies with horror elements. I also write just straight contempt to pay the bills, and also because I love those books and those stories are important to me. But I write a lot of things that are very specifically a bit genre weird, and even my contempts often, particularly the ones I wrote close to the beginning of my career, when I was less able to just put together this is this trope, and this trope. Give me an offer kind of pitch, are often quite to the left of what the genre was necessarily doing, even when they're otherwise very straight contemporary romance and have no, aliens or Lovecraftian gods in them.
So what you're saying is your publishers have a really fun time choosing the BISAC codes and categories for your books.
Oh god, yeah, no, it's completely nightmarish for them, I'm sure. I leave that very much at their end.
Nice. I would like to know, what are you reading right now?
A whole bunch of things that I read quite voraciously. One of the things I'm reading right now actually is an 800-page history of warfare called War in Human Civilization by a guy called Ari Gatt. Well, the history of war happens to be the thing that's kind of currently on my on the book reader app on my tablet, just because I have a really dilettantish interest in history, and it got recommended a lot I read.
Some light holiday reading there for you. My very important question for you is, what character do you use when you were playing Clue/Cluedo?
Oh gosh, I do like Miss Scarlet, I've got to admit. Also, I think she goes first, which is nice. The reason that there is a vicar in the book is that one of the characters in Cluedo in the UK, Cluedo, is Reverend Green, who is a vicar. In the American version, he's not. He's just Mr. Green, and I think he's an ex-gangster, which is why he's got the background he's got in the book. Spoiler, because it was felt that Americans would have a problem with the idea of a vicar committing crimes. But I will say, genuinely, particularly as a kid, I had a weird superstitious thing where I never played a game of Cluedo where Reverend Green was the murderer, and I did get slightly odd about it. It did eventually happen once, but I think that game actually got cancelled because something happened in the middle of that game. So I for years thought there was something odd about Reverend Green. But I am very much a Scarlet player, I think, at heart.
She's my default too, usually, I think, as well. And one more book-related question. I wanted to ask, what romance book has inspired you the most, whether it's with your writing or just inspired in general?
Oh, gosh, that's incredibly hard because obviously I do read
5 romance books.
I think that makes it even harder than anyone who doesn't make the list kind of feels incredibly insulted. I always love the work of Laura Kinsale. I found the way she writes, particularly in historical work, it is like nothing I've ever quite read before. The way she inhabits her characters is something I don't like to say striven to emulate, because I don't like emulating people, but it's something that's meant a lot to me. If it's cheating to mention a book I edited, then Chris Ripper's Kith and Kin really, really inspired me in a lot of ways. It's a fantastic kind of family saga about a lot of weird, complicated things, involving kind of found family and finding yourself and kind of intersections within extended family units, and also cults, or at least being a survivor of a cult, amongst other things. And it's one of the things I feel kind of proudest to have worked on in a lot of ways. I mean, obviously, about my own work as well. But it's easy to be proud of other people's stuff, I find, at least if you're British, because being proud of your own things is, is shameful and is beaten out of you as a child. I don't actually mean that. So my parents were very nice people, but just culturally.
No, that's great. We'll include the links to anything there. So anyone who's listening can check them out. Those will be in the show notes.
And just before we wrap up and let you go, where can listeners find you online?
Oh, fabulous. I've done another interview recently about my stupid Twitter handle. So the easiest way to find me online is just to freaking Google for Alexis Hall author. That's a lot easier because my website is quoquevault.com, which comes from the first two words of the Athanasian Creed for reasons I won't go into. And that is, let me make sure I get this right, QUICUNQUEVULT.com. I'm on Twitter at Quoquevault. I'm Quoquevault on Instagram. I'm technically on Facebook, but it basically just mirrors my bits of Instagram. That's just a legacy thing. I don't think I've forgotten any of the other social medias, but I lose track. There's so many of them these days. Again, I'm very much a 90s kid. Like, as far as there's a tiny part of me that is surprised I don't have a live journal.
Oh, I like that. I like that you're still blogging. I was reading your blog before we started chatting.
Yeah, no, I'm self-consciously retro in a lot of ways. Also, I'm not a succinct person, so Twitter is not a good medium for me in a lot of ways. So yeah, give me somewhere I can write a 10,000 word essay and I'm happy.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for coming and talking to us. This has been really great. And hopefully we can see you back again on Kobo with your other books, but with Hannah and Liza in particular,
That would be lovely.
Thank you for listening to the Kobo ReWriting Life podcast. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And be sure to follow us on socials. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter. This episode was hosted by Stephanie McGrath and Tara Kremen, with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music is composed by Tearjerker. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing!